Hey there, welcome back to our kitchen. I'm Casey, one of Festival's Mealtime Mentors. Today we're whipping up a batch of one of my now favorite soups, a creamy tomato basil bisque. So to get started with this one, I'm going to turn my burner up to medium. I'm just going to add a little bit of olive oil in there and let that warm up a little bit. And then over here, I'm going to get started with chopping some of our herbs. So I'm going to start with some garlic. I'm just going to go through and mince some of this to add. So creamy tomato basil bisque, or just really tomato soup in general, was never one of my favorites growing up. I was that kid at the school lunch, you know, tomato soup and grilled cheese is a very popular lunch. I was the one who just ate grilled cheese. I was not a tomato soup fan. But as I've gotten older, I've definitely started to appreciate it a little bit more. And this one is definitely the favorite one that I've ever had. It's got really great flavor from that basil, and then I think the creaminess is really what does it for me too. So don't count this one out if you're not typically a tomato soup lover, like I wasn't. Okay, great. So now I'm going to move over to our basil. We just have some fresh basil here. I'm going to actually roll up our stack of leaves. I'm going to start cutting it this way. So this is what would give you what's called a chiffonade cut, so you kind of get long, thin strips of the basil. You could stop there if you wanted to. It might kind of leave you with some pretty big chunks of basil, which might be tricky on a spoon. So I'm just going to keep going a little further and chop this up. If you don't want to use fresh basil, you could certainly try a dried basil if maybe you have that in your pantry already. I would say just cut back on the amount of dried basil versus fresh, because dried spices tend to be a little more powerful than the fresh. But this is a great way. I mean, I love basil, so I'll take any excuse to use it. But also, if maybe you grow basil in the summer, and maybe it is summer, you want to make this soup, or maybe you store the basil to use all year round. That would be a really great way to use this. All right, so we've got our olive oil heating up over here. So now I'm going to add all of the garlic. I'm just going to add about half of this basil. And we're just going to let this cook for just a little bit until that garlic gets really fragrant. So like I said, we're really just using garlic and basil as kind of our main spices for today. But you could certainly add other spices if you prefer. Like a rosemary or a thyme would be really good. I think oregano goes really great with tomato dishes. That would be good. If you wanted to add a little bit of heat, you could add like a cayenne or a crushed red pepper. Those would be really great in this too. But we're keeping it simple today. I can already smell that garlic. So I'm going to keep going then with our soup ingredients. So we're going to add some crushed tomatoes, some canned crushed tomatoes. We're adding 2 cans of this. We're using crushed tomatoes today. I prefer crushed tomatoes. I always try to keep these on hand in my pantry because they're really great as a base for just like a simple red sauce for pasta if I didn't plan dinner one night maybe. They're also great to just add to soups and stews and things like that. I'm also going to add a little low sodium chicken broth as well. But the crushed tomatoes are really more of a sauce consistency. You do have some little chunks of tomato throughout there, but I really like that in this soup. If you wanted more chunky tomatoes throughout, you could use like a diced tomato instead. Those will, of course, be diced, but you'll be able to kind of see those tomatoes more and they won't be quite as saucy, I guess, in their consistency. Or if you really wanted it smoother than that, you could use like a tomato puree or even just a tomato sauce instead of the crushed tomatoes. All right, so we are going to turn our heat down to low. I'm going to cover this and we're going to let this simmer for about 10 minutes. Ooh, this smells so good. It's nice and steamy now. So we're ready to add the rest of our ingredients. So to this, I'm actually going to turn my burner off now. I'm going to add some heavy cream. That's what makes it creamy, of course. I'm going to add some butter. I've gone ahead and kind of chopped the butter up a little bit just so it melts a little easier. I'm adding just a little bit of sugar, and then I'm going to add the rest of that basil that I chopped earlier. So the sugar is a really good addition in this soup. It kind of helps to balance that tartness, tanginess from the acidity of the tomatoes. Feel free to play around with that if you maybe want it a little bit sweeter, or maybe you really like that acidity from the tomatoes, so you want to add less. But it's a really brings out that tomato flavor in this soup. So now I'm just going to stir this until all that butter melts. Perfect. Everything's nice and mixed together. So we're ready to eat. So I'm going to scoop this into a bowl here. This is really great to serve with, of course, grilled cheese, like we talked about earlier. It'd also be really good with just like a crusty bread and maybe a green salad. That would be a really good meal. All right, and then I'm just going to garnish with some freshly grated Parmesan. Ooh, and it melts right away. Love that. So warm up with a bowl of this delicious creamy bisque, and to get this recipe on your phone, text tomato to 78402. And for more recipes and resources from your mealtime mentors, visit festfoods.com.